this video, we will go over how to use the Auto Cluster tool in our spatial products. The Auto Cluster tool is a tool that allows you to automatically cluster data into contiguous areas with similar aggregated values. In this example, you can see I have some outlets plotted on a map, and I would like to separate them into clusters based on a certain aggregated value in their data. To look at their data, I'll bring up the data grid of this layer. And we can see here in the data grid, there are various fields I have concerning these outlets plotted on the map, such as province, region, town, trade channel, etc. The column that I'm interested in and that I want to use to cluster my outlets by is the total volume column. So I would like to create clusters that don't go beyond a certain aggregated total volume of outlets, ensuring that each cluster contains a certain amount of outlets that add up to no more than a certain aggregated value. So to do that, we can use the Auto Cluster tool. Go to the Tools tab and find it over there, or we can type in the search bar and look for it. There we go. As I click on it, it brings up the Auto Cluster dialog box. First thing we choose is the layer that we're going to be doing the auto clustering on, and here it's already chosen for me, which is my retail outlets layer. The next thing is the cluster field. This will be the field in your data where your clusters will be populated. You can choose an existing field in your data for the clusters to be populated into, and this will overwrite any values that might already be in those fields. But if you want to add a new cluster field, you can click on the new cluster field button. I will do that and give it a name. Then click OK, and the new cluster field has been created for me. The next thing we can choose is a cluster category. This is a certain category we can make sure that the clusters stay in when we are doing our auto clustering. So for example, if I wanted my clusters to not go cross province and to keep each cluster in their own respective province, I could choose my province column as my cluster category. In this case, I'm not concerned about that, so I'm not going to choose any cluster category. The next thing to specify is the aggregation field. This is the field in your data that you will be aggregating on, and in this case, it's going to be my total volume field. There we go. And then you can choose the aggregation type, which will be sum in this case. Then over here, the aggregation total, it already gives me a preview of the total aggregation value of all my outlets in my data. And then the next thing we can specify is an aggregation limit. This will make sure that the clusters don't go beyond that certain aggregated amount, and will thereby break up my points into different clusters. In this example, I want to create clusters that don't go beyond 1 billion of aggregated total volume for the outlets in each cluster. So I'll enter that in. And as I've entered that in, I get an approximate number of clusters that will be created with that aggregation limit, and here it says 15, which I'm happy with. Then finally, we'll specify the cluster type that you want to do. Rectangular will make it in a rectangular arrangement of clusters, contiguous to each other, or you can choose a radial pie type of arrangement of your clusters, coming out and being plotted around a center point, which you can pick from your scene by ticking on pick and then clicking in your scene, and the clusters will be created radially from that center point. In this case, I just want to do a regular rectangular arrangement, so I will leave it on this tab here. And now what you can also specify is if you only wanted to cluster selected points only, which I would have selected using one of the selection tools, or visible points only, so it would only cluster those points that are visible and showing on the scene and not any points hidden or filtered out. In this case, I want to cluster all my outlets, so I will not tick any of these on. And now I'm ready to do my auto clustering. I'll click compute, and it lets me know it is now done. I'll say OK, and then I'll just close this dialog, and we can look at our results. I'll open the layer data grid of my retail outlets layer. And we can see here that my cluster field has been added with all my cluster numbers populated for me, and my outlets have been broken up into clusters based on the aggregation limit I set on the certain field in my data, which was total volume. Now, to actually visually see and make sense of these clusters, we can apply some theming now based on this new cluster field that's been added for us with our cluster values. To do that, we will go to the layer properties of this layer, and then thematics. And then we can specify a new theme, which I will call cluster. We'll come to the colors tab to do a color theme, and then choose our color column. And that column will be cluster. Then I will say choose unique colors for those cluster values in that cluster column. And as I click that, it automatically chooses some colors for each cluster value in my cluster column. I can then change these colors if I wanted to and choose different ones, and even open up the color palette and drag in some color schemes and choose different colors. I'll just take the defaults for now. And then I can say OK. And my theming has been applied, and I can visually see exactly where my different clusters are and how they have been broken up. I can isolate specific clusters I want to look at, and then zoom to them. Put them all back on, and look at the overall view again. And that is all for this demonstration. Thank you very much.